The warship that would become one of the most feared vessels of World War II did not begin as a symbol of power. It began as a response to fear that the United States Navy was falling behind in a rapidly changing world. After witnessing Japan's aggressive expansion in the Pacific and the shocking attack on Pearl Harbor, American naval designers realized that the next generation of warships needed to be faster, stronger, and far more lethal than anything they had ever built. In late 1940, inside the steel-gray halls of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, engineers gathered around blueprints that looked almost unreal. The ship they envisioned would carry more firepower than any previous American cruiser. It would be armored heavily enough to withstand brutal air attacks, yet agile enough to maneuver through the island chains of the Pacific. Every bolt, every weld, every gun mount carried the weight of a nation desperate to regain control of the ocean. As construction began, thousands of workers, welders, riveters, electricians, labored day and night. Sparks from cutting torches lit up the shipyard like a constellation of small stars. The skeleton of the ship grew steadily, ribs of steel rising from the dry dock until the shape of a war beast emerged. Even before completion, sailors walking by would stop, whistle softly, and say the same thing. This one's different. The ship was designed to survive the deadliest threats of the era. Long-range Japanese torpedoes, swarms of dive bombers, and the terrifying new weapon everyone whispered about, kamikaze pilots. To face them, the warship carried a wall of anti-aircraft guns, advanced fire control radar, and engines powerful enough to outrun most threats. By the time the hull touched water for the first time, even hardened officers were impressed. Newspapers called it a floating fortress. Admirals described it simply as the ship we needed, exactly when we needed it. But sailors had another name for it, one that spread quickly across the Pacific after its first combat, the Beast. The nickname wasn't just about firepower. It was about resilience. During trials at sea, engineers pushed the ship to its limits. Storms battered it, waves crashed over its bow, but the warship cut through the ocean with the confidence of a predator finally unleashed. When live-fire tests began, its guns roared so fiercely that nearby ships trembled from the shockwaves. Crews realized they weren't just preparing a new vessel, they were awakening something powerful. As war intensified, the Beast set sail toward the Pacific theater. For many on board, it wasn't just another assignment. It felt like stepping onto a weapon forged specifically for the battles ahead. Officers studied charts, radar operators checked their equipment, and gunners ran drills long into the night. Everyone understood that soon, far from home, Japanese forces would meet a machine built precisely to destroy them. But before firing its first shot, the warship made its presence known. Enemy scouts reported spotting a massive silhouette slicing across the waves. Fast, dark, and unmistakably American. Commanders on both sides sensed it. A new power had entered the war. And once the Beast arrived on the battlefield, the Pacific would never be the same again. When the Beast entered service, its true strength wasn't its size or its speed. It was the unprecedented firepower packed into every corner of its steel hull. American naval designers had studied every major sea battle of the early war, from the chaos of the Java Sea to the burning wreckage at Pearl Harbor, and they reached a simple conclusion. Whoever controlled the skies and the seas with overwhelming fire would control the Pacific. The ship's main battery became its most iconic feature. Massive guns, each the size of a small locomotive, were mounted in armored turrets thick enough to survive a direct hit from enemy shells. These weapons could hurl explosive projectiles over 20 miles, striking with the force of an earthquake. During early gunnery trials, officers watched in stunned silence as targets shattered into clouds of debris. Even veteran sailors had never seen that kind of destructive power. But the Beast wasn't designed only for long-range duels. Lessons from Midway and Guadalcanal had shown that naval warfare had entered a new age, an age where danger came from above. Kamikaze attacks, dive bombers, and torpedo planes had turned the Pacific into a deadly arena. So the Beast was equipped with an arsenal of anti-aircraft weapons that turned its decks into a fortress of steel barrels and radar-guided fury. Rows of 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons lined its rails, forming a defensive wall capable of throwing thousands of rounds into the sky every minute. New fire control radars, freshly developed by American scientists, calculated enemy trajectories with astonishing accuracy. It wasn't just firepower, it was precision. And in naval warfare, precision was the difference between surviving the day or becoming another burning silhouette on the horizon. The first time the Beast faced a real attack, this new technology proved its worth. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft spotted the task force and radioed coordinates for incoming waves of bombers. Sirens wailed across the ship, crews sprinted to their stations, and the ocean filled with the angry hum of incoming engines. As the enemy descended, turret crews locked in, radars tracked multiple targets, and gunners steadied their hands. Then the Beast unleashed its fury. The sky erupted into flashes of white and red as hundreds of shells burst around the incoming planes. Tracers streaked upward like glowing threads, stitching deadly patterns through the clouds. One bomber after another fell into the sea, some breaking apart midair, others crashing in spirals of black smoke. Sailors later recalled that moment with a mix of awe and relief. The ship had proven itself exactly as promised. Despite the chaos above, the Beast remained steady, its armored hull absorbing shock waves and shrapnel. Even close misses, which might have crippled other vessels, barely scratched its surface. Engineers had crafted the ship not just to fight, but to endure, to take hits and keep firing, to outlast anything thrown at it. By the end of the engagement, the Beast stood unharmed, while the sea around it was littered with burning fragments of aircraft. Reports sent back to American command were clear and almost proud. The ship performed beyond expectations. News of the battle spread quickly. Japanese pilots began referring to it as the ship that shoots down the sky. Allied crews simply called it a Guardian, a vessel whose firepower had changed the rhythm of naval warfare. From that day forward, enemy commanders treated it with caution. Naval doctrine shifted, and every sailor aboard the Beast understood something powerful. They were serving on a warship that had redefined what American naval strength meant. The firepower wasn't just destructive, it was transformative. When the USS Washington finally slipped into the Pacific, she entered a world already burning. The year was 1942, and the Empire of Japan had steamrolled through the region with terrifying speed. Every sailor aboard knew they weren't just sailing into a battlefield. They were sailing into the very heart of the inferno. The Washington's first test came as she escorted convoys toward the Solomon Islands, a stretch of ocean that had quickly become one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The skies were thick with humidity, the nights unnervingly silent, and the crew lived with the constant expectation that any shadow on the horizon might suddenly explode into fire. On her first approach to Guadalcanal, the Washington's radar, then one of the most advanced systems afloat, picked up distant movements. The Japanese Navy was probing, searching for weaknesses. The Washington's crew went to general quarters, the steel corridors echoing with boots and shouted orders. Gun crews loaded shells the size of small cars, each one capable of turning a ship into twisted metal. But the real threat came from above. Japanese land-based bombers swept in low from the distant clouds, using sun glare as cover. Alarm klaxons screamed. The Washington's anti-aircraft guns opened up with a roar that shook the deck. Red tracer lines slashed upward as explosions burst in the sky. The crew watched as one bomber spiraled downward, flames ripping across its fuselage before it disappeared into the sea. But the attacks kept coming. For hours the ship maneuvered at full speed, dodging torpedoes and diving bombers. The spray from near misses rained over the deck. The smell of cordite clung to the air. For many young sailors, it was their first time witnessing the brutal reality of war, and the realization that every second could be their last. Despite the chaos, the Washington held firm. Her armor absorbed shrapnel, Her gunners stayed steady, and the ship's radar allowed her to detect threats long before other vessels even knew they were there. She was learning, adapting, proving herself in the most unforgiving environment on the planet. Then came the moment that defined her early Pacific service. A Japanese submarine, stalking the convoy for hours, launched a spread of torpedoes aimed directly at the American battleship. The Washington's operators detected the incoming threat just in time. With engines screaming, the massive ship executed a hard turn, something few believed a battleship of her size could even attempt. The torpedoes sliced past her hull, missing by mere meters. That night, as the crew stood watch under a sky glowing from distant fires on Guadalcanal, they understood the truth. The Washington wasn't just another ship in the fight. She was a shield, a guardian for every Marine on the island, for every transport ship trying to get supplies through, for every sailor depending on her strength. She had survived her baptism in the Pacific flames. But this was only the beginning. Much darker nights lay ahead. Nights when the Washington would be forced into battles so deadly and chaotic that they would redefine naval warfare itself. The inferno had welcomed her, but the real test was still waiting, just beyond the horizon. By late 1942 and early 1943, the USS Washington had earned a fearsome reputation across the Pacific. To American crews, she was a guardian angel. To the Japanese, she was a shadow in the night, massive, silent, and lethal. But even legends bleed, and the Washington came dangerously close to disaster more than once. One of her closest brushes with death came during a nighttime operation near the Solomon Islands. The seas were black, the sky moonless. Perfect conditions for the Imperial Japanese Navy, masters of night fighting. The Washington's radar screens flickered with ghostly contacts. Destroyers, cruisers, and something larger moving among them. The crew braced themselves. Suddenly, Japanese shells tore through the darkness. A cruiser hidden behind the silhouette of an island opened fire, sending glowing tracers arcing toward the American battleship. The first shells screamed past the superstructure, splashing into the water just yards away. The concussion shook the deck. Crewmen scrambled to battle stations as the Washington fired back, lighting the night with the thunder of her 16-inch guns. But the real danger was invisible. Moments after the gunnery duel began, a Japanese destroyer launched a full spread of long lance torpedoes, the deadliest torpedoes of the war. Fast, powerful, and with almost no wake, they sliced silently through the dark water toward the Washington. Radar detected them too late. The torpedoes were already closing in, and the ship had seconds to react. The Washington's helmsman, barely 23 years old, threw the wheel hard over. The Titanic ship heeled violently, the deck tilting as the engines strained. Sailors clung to railings as lockers, tools, and crates slid across the floor. A torpedo passed so close it scraped the turbulence along the hull, but didn't explode. If it had struck, thousands of tons of steel would have been ripped open, and the Washington might have joined the list of battleships resting at the bottom of the Pacific. But the ocean wasn't done trying to claim her. During another encounter, high above the ship, Japanese Aichi dive bombers descended like metal hawks. Their sirens wailed, their wings shimmered in the sun, and their bombs tumbled toward the Washington's deck. One bomb exploded so near the bow that the shockwave tore open seams in the hull plating. Water flooded forward compartments, and alarms blared throughout the ship. Damage control teams rushed into the smoke-filled corridors. They fought rising water, shoring up buckling bulkheads with wooden beams, sealing cracks with emergency patches. The ship groaned as if she were alive and fighting for her own survival. Hours later, bruised and exhausted, the crew stabilized her. They were shaken but alive. Perhaps the closest call of all came not from an enemy attack, but from the merciless sea itself. A monstrous storm struck while the Washington was escorting carriers in the Central Pacific. Waves taller than houses slammed into her bow. The ship plunged and rose like a massive iron whale, her screws lifting clear of the water before crashing back down. Steel twisted. Rivets popped. For a moment, some believed she might capsize. But she refused to break. Every sailor aboard understood something profound after that storm. The Washington wasn't unsinkable. She survived because her crew refused to give up, and because fate, again and again, gave them just enough room to fight back. The ocean had tried to swallow her. The enemy had tried to destroy her. And yet, battered and scarred, the Washington kept returning to battle. She wasn't unsinkable by design. She was unsinkable by will. Long after the guns of World War II fell silent, the shadow of one American warship continued to stretch across naval history. The USS Washington was not just a ship. She was a warning, a reminder, a steel testament to what happens when engineering, firepower, and unbreakable crew spirit merge into something almost unstoppable. Even today, historians hesitate when describing her. Powerful feels too soft. Dangerous feels incomplete. The Washington wasn't just dangerous. She was decisive. Her legacy begins with the cold numbers. 45,000 tons of steel. 9 16-inch guns capable of shattering mountains. Armor thick enough to shrug off most enemy shells. A radar system ahead of its time. But these figures don't tell the whole story. What terrifies history is not the machine, but what the machine did. In November 1942, during the legendary naval battle of Guadalcanal, the Washington hunted the Japanese battleship Kirishima in the pitch-black waters of Iron Bottom Sound. The sea was thick with smoke and fire, ships burning, shells flying blindly. Radar guided the Washington through the chaos like a hunter in the dark. When she opened fire, the ocean itself seemed to freeze. Her first salvo slammed into the Kirishima with the force of a meteor. Within minutes, the Japanese battleship was crippled. Fires raging, guns silenced, hull flooding. It was the only time in history that a modern battleship sank another battleship in a one-on-one nighttime duel. That moment alone secured the Washington's place in legend. But what makes her truly fearsome is something deeper. She survived everything thrown at her. Torpedoes, dive bombers, storms, ambushes, all failed. Other ships of her generation were sunk, crippled, or reduced to scrap. Yet the Washington emerged again and again, battered but undefeated. Her crew felt this invincibility. Sailors often whispered that the ship wanted to live, as if the steel itself refused to sink. After every battle, damage control teams found twisted plates and scorched paint. But the armor held. The engines kept turning. The guns kept firing. Even Japanese naval officers later admitted they feared her. Many believed that any task force containing the Washington automatically had the upper hand. She became a symbol of American industrial might, a floating fortress that could strike hard and survive harder. And yet, perhaps the most haunting part of her legacy is how quietly her story ended. After the war, the age of the battleship faded. Carriers replaced giants of steel. Despite her flawless combat record, the Washington was eventually retired, her guns silenced not by enemy fire, but by time. She was scrapped in 1961, cut apart piece by piece. The ship that shattered a battleship and survived the Pacific's deadliest battles vanished from the ocean she once dominated. But legends don't die with the hull. Today, students of naval warfare still study her battles. Engineers still admire her design. Military strategists still debate how one ship managed to alter the balance of power in the Pacific. And veterans who served aboard her, those who remain, still speak of her with a mixture of pride and awe. What terrifies history is not destruction, but dominance. Not chaos, but precision. Not fear, but respect. The USS Washington embodied all of that. She didn't just fight in World War II. She left a scar on it. And that scar still echoes across the pages of history, reminding every navy in the world that once, for a brief moment, a steel giant ruled the Pacific, and nothing could bring her down.